And there we go. Now people should start floating in, and Chris said he'll be joining us in a second. So yeah, attendees are starting to come in now. So welcome to all those people who are now flooding in. If you can just let us know where you're dialing in from, which city, which country, that'll be great, just so that we're familiar with everybody. We normally tend to get people from all across the world. So I'm dialing in from London. Paris, Chicago. Oh, John. Yes, in Chicago. Belgium. There we go. See, we get, a very diverse crew from all over the world. Sweden, San Francisco. We're just waiting for one more of the panelists, but, everybody's getting warmed up now. We've been doing our stretching and exercises,
So are you going to force us to sing superfragilitatis, even though the sound of it is even quite
You can.
atrocious?
Italy, Colombia.
Go for it. I'm not.
You definitely can, Bill. Have you been practicing?
No, I watched that movie too many times. I had kids who watched that movie too many times. So.
Yeah, I think my daughter's watched it a couple of times, but not.
No,
it sounds like you really are a bit of a.
It's like on repeat all the time. It's like,
oh
cow,
my
really?
goodness, Oklahoma. Welcome to Oklahoma.
That's Angela. Hey, Angela, how you doing?
Oklahoma, where the wind blows freely over the plains.
Bill's on a roll.
I don't know.
Him.
I am wound up today. Sorry.
Mute him, Samir.
Yes, yes. But it's just too much fun, John. It's way too much fun. Twin Cities.
Hey, Blaze.
Hello, Kat from London. I saw Kat the other day. We actually had a face-to-face.
Yeah, I saw the photo of you two.
Yeah.
That was really great.
Yeah.
I was extremely jealous.
I mean, there was no computer screen in front of us. So, I mean...
You weren't in a box?
Did you know how to interact with each other?
Yeah, that was... Yeah. It's like, whoa, I'm supposed to speak now properly? And, no, it was a good time.
Did you test your microphone before you
started
talking to her?
I did. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm on mute. You're on mute. Hey, Christopher.
Hey, how are you? I'm sorry, I'm a bit late.
That's all right. People are just coming in. We've got Tim coming in from Dallas. We've got Twin Cities. We've got Oklahoma. We've got Italy, Colombia, Palo Alto, Stockholm, San Francisco, Belgium, Paris, London. The whole world is with us.
Fantastic. Oh, my God. Okay. Making me hungry just thinking of all those places.
Oh, my goodness. Exactly. Yes. And you are a foodie, aren't you?
Yeah, I like food.
Yes, I do remember that. Yeah. So, look, I think in the interest of time, and we should get going. Thank you for everybody, for turning up to this. Some of you, it's early morning. Some of you, it's evening. Certainly, Europe is an hour ahead of London. So thank you for joining way past your bedtime. Not really, but you know what I mean. It's also welcome to all of our panelists. One of the things that I'd like to do is just to give you a quick view of what we do, why we do this. I'd firstly like to thank Pact, who's our media sponsor. They have been brilliant in the series so far at handing out freebie copies of many books. And in this particular final AMA of the year, we will be offering 4 books and 2 copies of each. So do look out for, well, not look out, but do listen out for the questions and be ready, trigger ready at your keyboard to type in those responses, only 2 of those each. So I'd like to thank my compadres here, John and Bill, for sticking with me throughout this series of events and for being their crazy and zany selves, but for bringing great knowledge, insights, and the fun and frolics to this. And absolutely, would like to thank Bruno and Christopher for joining us today. It's really good to have you both here. And thank you for, giving us your time and dedicating an hour and a half, which is quite a stretch, but thank you so much. And it's a really incredibly hot topic that we're discussing today. And as I was a bit cheeky on the old, on the title, it's the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious data value chain. Data fabrics, data meshes, buzzwords explored. So, I think from those points of view, there's a lot of discussion we can have. I certainly turn to the people out there in the audience to engage. There's a chat box, there's a Q&A function. We are ready to take all of your questions. I already have a number of questions, and again, the panelists have not seen these questions at all, so they have no clue what's coming up. So they hopefully should have, they should be very good at Disney knowledge. Trivial Pursuits we're playing on Disney. No, I'm only joking. So, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Samir, and I'll be the host and facilitator today. So look, let me just do a few introductions. As you know, John and Bill have been in the series as a mainstay. John is a global operations executive who excels at building and managing innovative, growth-orientated data and technology organizations. He's currently at CSL Behring as the global head of advanced analytics and artificial intelligence. He's written quite a number of books, 2 of them, building analytics teams and analytics, how to win with intelligence. He's a keynote speaker, and he's just an all-round good guy. I mean, you know, thanks, John.
And he's working on his 3rd book.
He is, and he's working on his 3rd book. Yes, and then Bill, come across to Bill, otherwise known as the Schmarzo, affectionately, Dean of Big Data, a professor, educator, and he's written 4 books, and he's dancing in the background and be singing for you later. Big Data, understanding how big data powers big business, Big Data MBA, driving business strategies with data science, and now economics of data analytics and digital transformation, which we know Bill has been speaking a lot about on LinkedIn, and thinking like a data scientist. So those are the 4 books. And you're an executive fellow at University of San Francisco, honorary professor at NUI Galway, and an adjunct professor at Menlo College. So welcome again, and thank you for being with me in this craziness. And Christopher Bergh is the CEO and head chef of Data Kitchen, a data ops software and services startup. I think you've got about 30 years of experience in research, software engineering, data analytics, executive management. And you've had a lot of different levels in organizations, COO, CTO, VP, director of engineering. So you've got the full breadth and depth of knowledge right across this stack. You're recognized as an expert on data ops, and Chris is also an author, co-author of the Data Ops Cookbook and the Data Ops Manifesto. So welcome, Chris. I keep calling you Chris, should be Christopher, but hopefully Chris is all right.
You can call me whatever you want, but Chris is good.
Don't say that, Chris.
Yeah, don't empower him. Don't empower him.
And finally,
I like
Bruno.
Excellency, that's always good.
Your Excellency, okay, yes, I'm sure. And Bruno, thank you so much for being with us today. Bruno is currently the head of data and analytics at Google Cloud, and his focus is on scaling businesses and turning them into global leaders. He also is the author of 2 books, Data Analytics on data analytics and enterprise performance management. He's got a weekly data and AI and analytics podcast, and specialities are data analytics, data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So welcome, Bruno. Wonderful to have you.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here today. And
absolutely.
A bunch of old friends here. It's exciting to see you guys on this.
Yeah, we're a community, which is great.
Is that friends who are old, or friends?
No,
hey, keep me out of that loop, okay?
For a long time. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have thought of
long time friend.
Yes. No ageism here, Bill. And by the way, we've got 4 books to give away today: Practical Data Science with Python by Nathan George, Python GUI Programming with Takinta by Alan D. Moore, Machine Learning for Time Series with Python by Ben Alfarth, and Learn Python Programming by Fabrizio Romano and Heinrich Kruger. So I'll be asking questions. So listen, here we go. I'm just going to give a quick introduction about the data mesh. By way of an introduction, the data mesh was first introduced by ThoughtWorks, I believe, via a blog called How to Move Beyond a Monolithic Data Lake to a Distributed Data Mesh. And trying to gather all the information and work out what this data mesh is. So I came across a blog which outlines it in this way. The data mesh is an exciting new approach to designing and developing data architectures. Unlike a centralized and monolithic architecture based on a data warehouse and/or a data lake, a data mesh is a highly decentralized data architecture. So the data mesh tries to solve three challenges with a centralized data lake warehouse. Lack of ownership, who owns the data? So, the data source team or the infrastructure team. Lack of quality. So the infrastructure team is responsible for quality, but does not know the data well, and organizational scaling. The central team becomes the bottleneck, such as with an enterprise data lake or warehouse. So its goal is to treat data as a product, with each source having its own data product manager or owner who are part of a cross-functional team of data engineers, and being its own clearly focused domain that has an autonomous offering, becoming the fundamental building blocks of a mesh, leading to a domain-driven distributed architecture. Now, it's a mindset shift, I believe, that people are talking about. And so it goes from centralized ownership to decentralized ownership, pipelines as first-class concern to domain data as a first-class concern, data as a byproduct to data as a product, a siloed data engineering team to a cross-functional domain data teams, and a centralized data lake warehouse to an ecosystem of data products. So those are the kinds of things that we're all grappling with. Now, we're all grappling with, how do we implement it? How does it scale? How do we get governance over the top of it? How do we actually introduce it in a way that is decentralized in immature organizations? So here we're going to do the first question, which comes from Kat Holmes. And her question is, there's been a lot of buzz around data mesh lately, with some saying it's no different to previous frameworks. What do you think? If it's different, how is it different from, say, a monolithic data lake? And I think what I'd like to do, because both Chris and Bruno have extensively written about both data meshes, I'd really like to put this question to you as a starter. And let's go with Chris first. So that question, where some are saying it's no different to previous frameworks, what do you think? If it's different, how is it different from, say, a monolithic data lake?
Well, I think, if I could say, the idea here is that by putting everything in the data lake sounds nice, just like putting everything in a data warehouse sounds nice, but it hasn't worked. And so the build it and they'll come idea of data and analytics has been failing now for 20, 30 years, right? And so, and at a very high level, we're in the complexity business as well as the data business. And the idea of complexity means it's hard to do everything. Let's break the complexity up into smaller pieces. And in software, that's called domains. And there's a whole movement when you build your software to do domain-driven design. Tackle smaller pieces, and then give the people who own the smaller pieces ownership of them, right? And then second, make them really work closely with their customers instead of projects or products. That goes with software, and that goes with data as well. And so our customers are using our software to help do data meshes. I've personally been doing domain-driven design now for 15 years because it just makes sense from an engineering standpoint. And I think it's actually a really good thing in the sense that the data determinism of I'm going to build this wall of data that I call it a data lake, a data warehouse. It's just not working, and we need to change. And by having small teams who are focused on delivering customer value and focusing on their boundaries, and then thinking about how these boundaries relate to each other makes teams more productive. And there's a whole bunch of subsidiary reasons beyond that, but that's why I'm a fan of the concept, because stuff's not working in data and analytics, and we got to get better.
Bruno, what are your thoughts on that as well?
I would say it's very different, and it's very different because of the circumstances that organizations are dealing with today. If you think about 10 years ago, we're primarily focused on on-prem, highly specialized kind of workloads, and data was, primarily, the effort was around putting it all into one data warehouse and then trying to enforce the centralized governance and centralized access to data. Today, the average organization does not have the choice to do that because the majority of the data is moving to the cloud, right? If you look at Gartner's projections. So that's factor one, right? Your data is by nature going to be distributed. So you need to find a different way to interact with that data. Also, I think organizations are under pressure to do more with their data a lot faster. So the speed of interaction, this idea, a few years ago, we didn't really talk about real-time data and so forth. Now it's just basically how you do business. And in the last 2 years, I think we've seen that most businesses have to do this digital transformation where they are architected for a real-time world where most of the data is in the cloud, where data sharing becomes the norm. So where I think the data mesh is helpful for organizations, at least we work with, is it's not just a technical construct, it's an organizational construct. In the world where data is highly distributed, in the world where access and action on data is expected to happen a lot faster, and when your people are not coming to your store, they're not coming to your branch anymore, so you're interacting through multiple channels, it's a lot more complex. You're needing to add external data to your internal data. You need a different way to organize yourself. We have tried over the last 30 years to completely centralize and completely decentralize. It hasn't really worked. So you need now a new mental framework to think about how do you do both and how do you do both well. And so I think the data mesh provides this idea of thinking about, and I think it was Tom Davenport that said that, which is, centralize the management, the governance of the data while decentralize the innovation of what's happening with that data. And the data mesh is a great way to think about it. But it is not a technology blueprint. I think it's an organizational blueprint.
Right. So it's a cultural play then. It has to be weaved into the culture of the organization as well, because that is something that will be impacted if they're not mature enough. So Bill, I know you've had some thoughts around this, and you've put some stuff on LinkedIn around I don't agree with it. It's sort of, it's confusing. The architecture can sometimes just, is it a buzzword or not? But Bill, you've got perhaps a different issue or a different way of looking at this.
Yeah, we all know that data movement is bad, right? That we don't want to move data, that we want to accelerate time to insights. We want to, leave data in place, bring the analytics to the data. This is especially going to become true as more and more edge devices get out there. Data movement is just, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of waste. When I look at the data mesh, the promise of this, decentralized data, which I think is great, is something that, it's been talked about. Virtual data lakes have been around. People have talked about that for a while. It's not like it's anything really new. It just seems like a repackaging. The one thing about data meshes that I found very interesting was the governance model. And I think Bruno, this kind of plays on your point. To me, the data mesh is much less a data architecture and much more of a governance model, with who has responsibility for managing and taking care of the governance, which I think is very provocative. The separation of the governance model from the architecture seems like a very interesting, provocative step. And I'm intrigued by that idea and that concept.
Let me just bring John in here. John, you're working in a very large organization, which today works with a ton of data coming from many different maybe either devices or organizations, and putting together a lot of stack of medical or health data. How have you constructed this type of fabric within your organization, and how does it actually work, if it has, within CSL Behring as a concept for not only the data organization but for the business to utilize?
Yeah, I wouldn't talk about the way CSL is doing it. That's not a best practice, but we can certainly talk about it conceptually.
Okay.
I agree with what Bill has said on data movement, what Bruno and governance, and what Bruno has said, and obviously what Christopher has said as well. The thing is Bill's right. We've been talking about this for 17 years, if I'm correct, maybe 20 at this point, on data virtualization. And, we didn't have the disk speed. We didn't have in-memory databases. We didn't have the network speed. We didn't have the right servers. So data virtualization was horrible when it was first brought out. It was a mess. So, the idea that we're going to stop moving data, that's not going to happen. Data will continue to move around. People will want to have databases or data lakes or data warehouses or whatever they want, but they can all be active players in the data mesh or the data fabric. And in my opinion, the data mesh, the data fabric, those are two marketing terms, and they're virtually the same thing. So, if one vendor wants to sell you a mesh and another wants to sell you a fabric, then fine, go ahead, whatever you want to say. I do believe that the data mesh, the data fabric is a great idea. We do a lot of work in the advanced analytics area where we're dipping into cloud-based environments that are internally run. We have on-premise Hadoop environments. We have SAP HANA environments. We're subscribing to external providers. It makes our life a lot easier as analytics professionals if we don't have to ELT or ETL or move the data. You know, we dip in and get what we want, and we bring it together, and we use it in the use case that is appropriate for the objectives we're working on. So this idea, if vendors come and tell you, you know, you must abolish your data lake, and you have to get rid of your data warehouses, and you know, no data shall ever move, this fabric is magic, then they're jerking you. That's not the way it's going to work.
So one question from Mark Paradise is, and I think we've alluded to it in some way already, is it realistic to say data mesh can be incorporated into any organization at any kind of data maturity level? Or do you need to have a highly mature, successful data organization in order to implement it? Where do we see that sort of arc of, we've got enough maturity now we can implement? Or does it have to, you know, have you got any examples where that can be, you know, highly scaled in an environment?
I do.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got an order for who wants to answer.
Go ahead. No, just jump in. That's what we do, Bruno.
First of all, I think I want to agree with John here that, and to Bill's point, I think one of the reasons for why data mesh is confusing to people is because vendors have been appropriating the title or the term and tried to align it to their technology. That's the point I was trying to make. Is I think if I'm, you know, the customers I talk to, I tell them to think about it abstractly away from the technology. Think about it first from how you organize yourself, because I'm sure into next year and see a lot of vendors saying, oh yeah, I have the data mesh, but data mesh is not something you can buy. It's not a SKU. It's the same thing as AI, right? It's not a buy me some AI. So I think that's point one. I think point two is that, look, if you have more than 2 divisions, you probably have the opportunity to have a data mesh, because the minute you have more than 2 data and 2 data points and 2 databases, you have the opportunity to do that. The problem is how you get there. What are the fundamental blocks that are you going to need? And those really have not changed, right? You need to first have a foundational, architecture that allows you to trust your data, and kind of what we've seen customers call this the data ocean. This idea of, can I see my data from A to Z? Can I catalog it? Can I see my data across my on-prem environment, my cloud environment? And you have more than one cloud. You're going to have more than one cloud. So to John's point, data is going to move around. It's going to be distributed. So that's stage one. Before you start thinking about, you know, implementing a data mesh or anything, do you have ways to catalog, govern? Then getting into data mesh is really about distributed architecture and distributed innovation. And so now you can mature to your mesh. But I think actually there is something after the mesh, which we see customers evolving to, which is now what we call the data factory. This idea of, now I'm taking advantage of the mesh to build repeatable data solutions. So if I want to build anomaly detection or fraud analytics or any of those, I'm using the power of my mesh to build a solution that my people can use. And so I don't think the mesh is the end result. I think the mesh is one of the stages you go through in order to mature through your data transformation, if you will.
Chris, do you have a view on any of those points that Bruno's raised?
Yeah, I think, well, I do, but I was thinking about answering the conformed dimension question.
Okay.
In the chat. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So, because I've been doing it for years.
All right.
You know, the question, and I can answer it pretty clearly, is that you know, we all have entities that we're analyzing, right? And we can form them into a dimension so we can use them across different places. And the idea of a data mesh is that it's not just one mesh, right? And that if you get a team of people and they know the data, they can actually be highly productive, because the biggest challenge we have in data and analytics is we're wall builders and not focused on delivering business value. And the only thing that matters is not like all these words and logos and mesh and fabric. It matters, is your customer successful or not with it? And I guess I'm getting tired of the avoidant behavior of a lot of teams where they're, you know, they use words. We're implementing a data fabric, but they're so disconnected from value from their customer. So that aside, you know, you have the reality is you have more than one mesh, right? And some meshes actually end up doing the conforming, and other meshes actually are the consumer of that conformed dimension. And so you have to think about the relationship between each one of these teams and how they work together. And the literature's got this idea of ports or references. And it's the same thing in software. When you componentize your software, you have to think about relationships and how they work together. And I don't think it's hard. I just think you've got to look at the order of operations and who's in charge of what. And I'd rather have a team who understands, for instance, how to master physician data or how to conform physician or product or payer data very well, and then have another team focus on how to use that in a specific domain. And in, my history is doing it in the example of kind of commercial pharma. And in that case, there's lots of different data sets, and there's only 5 or 6 entities that you want to analyze. And you need to have different teams aligned to delivering value, because no one, we're kidding ourselves that data is a universal thing. And you can take your typical data engineer and data scientist, and they somehow can have a set of abstract skills that allow them to understand data. They need to understand the data to get value quickly. And they need to sit and own and understand it. And so I think having different teams, you've got to talk about how those teams relate to each other. And the conformed dimension is an example of that.
Bill, did you want to mention
many data meshes?
Thanks, Chris. Bill, you said I think you wanted to respond to that question as well.
Oh no, I think the conformed dimensions is a great point, because I think one of the things that Ralph Kimball talked about, zillion years ago, and Margie Ross, was this idea that we could have, departmentally owned data marts linked together through conformed dimensions. It's almost like, the departmental data marks plus conformed dimensions equals data mesh. The idea back then was you didn't move everything to a centralized data warehouse. That was the whole Bill Inman, Ralph Kimball fight forever and ever. And to a certain extent, maybe Ralph was right, is that the data mesh is kind of the next level of validation of the fact that you can have departmental data sources linked together through conformed dimensions. And basically this really empowers the power of, master data management to drive and manage all those. Yeah. So it's kind of like, okay, we've done it. As John pointed out, the technology evolution of the last 10 years has been dramatic, right? We have a lot more processing power, a lot more storage, speeds, internet speeds. It's just, everything has allowed us to sort of make that vision come true. And it's just been repackaged as a data mesh.
So, Arthur started this question in the chat about conformed dimensions. And I'll just throw a plug in there, shameless plug. Bill and I have been doing it for 37 years. So I actually think we did it and Ralph picked it up. So Ralph got credit, but I don't think he was the guy that actually
That's how we built our data marts at Procter & Gamble when we had over 10,000 Metaphor workstations there. Yeah, you're right.
So 37 years ago you were doing it, and we're talking about it today. But I want to bring in a question from Dan Demers. So in the chat, why not talk about the actual solution? We should move past these reboots of the same old data mesh versus warehouse versus fabric versus lakehouse, blibber blabber, and answer the only question that matters. Are we decoupling data from apps, i.e. data-centric, or not, i.e. app-centric? If we are, vendors and approaches can, should, and will be evaluated on how well they enable this future. Progress requires simplicity, in my opinion.
Let me continue on with the dialogue we were just having there. Arthur brought it up as, is the data mesh, can the data mesh support conformed dimensions? Of course it can. Absolutely. Mesh is at a different level than the conformed dimensions. Now, Dan has brought it forward at a different level, which is making it more overt. Do we need to decouple the data layer from the apps layer, from the network layer, from the compute layer, yes, absolutely we do. And that's what we've been talking about in piece parts. Conformed dimensions is just one treatment of data. Now, as we've been talking about, you're going to have data all over the place. It's going to be in internal stores, cloud-based, on-premise, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud. It's going to be in external vendors like Nielsen and IRI and Simmons and all these other places. So the future will force data decoupling from the apps. What you will have in either the data mesh or probably the data layer, is you will have virtual data models that bring them together and conform them and connect them in logical ways that does exactly what Christopher was talking about. We are moving towards a point of evolution to where this can actually function at the app layer, at the data layer, at the logic layer, at the transformation layer, all the different layers. And the reason that we continue to have these overlapping conversations is that everything new is based on what is old. So, we have those because it's all related and it's put together in a temporal thread that hopefully gets better over time. It's unfortunate that we have to keep going back and referring to the previous history, but those previous histories are relevant for what we do today.
Yeah, I guess I'd have to challenge you on that. I think the decoupling of the data and the app is one of the core sources of failure and why most data and analytic projects fail. And for instance, why most CDOs have a short tenure, why the number of companies who are self-reported being data-driven are declining. And I think the idea that you can build a system without with just focusing on one layer of the system is false. And so we are dealing with a highly complex system that has processes that go after. And what happens is we train a bunch of people to say, if we just get the data right, things will be perfect. What that means is there's a whole another series of people doing self-service data science, self-service analytics on top of that, who are adding more value to the data. And you've got these worlds of hub and spoke models where most companies are saying, get the data right and have the spokes, and they're largely disjoint, largely unconnected. And the people who are supposed to receive the value are still frustrated. And so we need to think in a unified model, or else we're not going to be successful, because we're in the complexity business as well as the data business.
I respectfully disagree. I think that if you're continuing to try to do this at the enterprise level, you're in the failure business. You will constantly be in the failure business. We do it where we build data layers and we build them with reuse in them. I have one data layer right now that has 5 different applications built on it over 5 different years. We built the applications and the data layer completely separate from each other, but the data layer was built informed with a vision of where we were going. So the apps are built on top of that. They were constructed years after the data layer. The reuse is there. The conformed dimensions are there, and the expansion of new data is there all the time. So I really think trying to do this at the enterprise layer is nothing but trying to shoot yourself in the head. I think you really need to do it by the use case level, and I think that works very well, and I've proven it over and over again.
Bruno, in some of the cases where we've got these opposing views in terms of where we do it, where have you seen it works best?
Are you trying to get me to disagree with both of them?
I'm trying to get. This is great. I love it. This is what I can see something happening here.
I've got a third view.
I can see something happening here. So,
I think Bill. I'll just say a few things here. I think what we're seeing with customers is it is a decoupling of both layers, primarily because the applications are evolving and who's building these applications is also changing. I think one of the trends that, if we're talking about next year, is low code, no code, and the access to people to build applications that are not centralized application. I think both of you have a good point in terms of the data will be enriched by people that are closer to the domain and the edge and closer to the innovation needs. There's certainly a need for using the same data at some point, but I think that one of the big opportunities we're going to see over the next 10 years is that the number of purpose-built applications that are built from the data up is going to go up. I think one of the issues we have today, take CRM or any other applications, is that they're really were built the wrong direction. They weren't built from the data up. They were built from a particular use case, and then we backed our way into the data, and that's why most of these applications.
Or they were built outside in.
They're useless.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, how many leaders today can actually trust the data that's in their CRM? And that's because it wasn't built from the data up. It was built from the other direction. So I think we'll see that change happening over the next 10 years. We see organizations today using composable frameworks. And Looker is a great example. People think about Looker as a BI tool. It's actually a framework for building data-rich, intelligent applications. I think we're going to see that change of building from the data up. So that's my contribution to this. I don't, Bill, if you were going to go
Bill, yeah, you've got a third view. Thank you, Bruno.
Well, so I actually think it's both at the departmental and the enterprise level. I think it's the case where, and this actually builds on a point that Bruno had made earlier, which is this is a cultural issue, right? We're trying to use technology to address a cultural issue where the culture doesn't have respect for how to use data. And that's on us as IT professionals. We've always made this about technology. We've always made this a conversation about technology. And then we've changed the names of things just to make it even more confusing. We are absolutely our own worst enemy. We should fire all the technology marketing people because all they do is confuse people. But it's really at the heart, it's a cultural issue. Kat posted up there, hub and spoke. Seen it work, seen it not work. Yeah, I've seen it work and not work, and it's all entirely based not on the architecture, but on the culture,
on the operating model, and how.
Yeah. I mean, do you have a culture that really seeks to respect data, and you have an executive mandate on sharing and reusing data to put a stake in the heart of data silos to eliminate ML orphaned analytics?
But we don't come at it from a culture level, because we all talk about something called a data culture. Now, this is what people talk about earnestly,
bullshit,
right?
By the way, bullshit.
There is no data culture. Exactly.
Bullshit on data culture. No executive gives a shit about data culture. What they care about is a value culture.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
how are we actually using this data to drive value? So
yeah, and this is what this is why I think we go down these sort of red herrings, and we get drawn into this type of world where we have to build a data culture where we're actually building more data silos. But we're gonna do a book giveaway, because this, I know, is an interesting discussion, but I've got 4 books to give away.
Hey, since these are not our books, can we join in?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can, absolutely.
I love Python book.
So the first one is,
you've got the title for your next book, BS on data culture.
I'm going to write that one with you, Bill, because I'm so into that one as well. Listen,
I'm starting the outline right now.
Okay, Practical Data Science with Python by Nathan George. So, which is the most popular language used in the data science world? Tom and John. Oh my goodness, Tom and John both got it right. Arthur, you just missed out on that. So I'll just make sure well done, Tom Lismont, and our very own John Thompson. I mean, the answer was in the title, wasn't it?
It kind of was.
Yeah. It's a culture. See, it's a culture thing.
Listen, so going back to what I want to do is to bring in something else that somebody has talked about. Alan Michaels has put some comments up, and I'd like to bring him in, because we've heard about a lot of these things. Dan is right. In my opinion, we need to talk about knowledge graphs, semantics, ontology, data centricity, etc. It goes on to talk about Dave McComb and so on, and post a link, and that's great. But let's not be diverted by that. What is it with everybody talking about knowledge graphs? I believe that's just another part of the technology stack. Semantics, we've been talking ontology, but what are your views on this? Because Alan is very passionate about this, and I really want to hear from you. Where are we on these areas, and how do they fit, and are they the answer?
Well, it's kind of mix and matching in there. I mean, knowledge graphs and semantic layers and ontologies, those are all approaches for modeling data. Now, some people would say graph is a database. Yes, of course, you can go that direction if you want to go technology. But I do think he's right at some level. We do need to be talking, and conformed dimensions are just another part of semantics and ontology. These are all elements. We're having this conversation around data. This is basically data modeling is what it is, and data structuring and data architecture. We've been doing this, all of us have been doing this for a long time, for decades and decades. Christopher has a really deep knowledge in pharma, Bill, CPG, retail, Bruno, I'm not sure which industries you've been focused on, but I know you've been all over the place. So, we don't really talk about data modeling and architecture very holistically. We generally talk about it in these very piecemealy parts. I did some work for, the US government, where they were trying to bring out some ontology mapping software. Incredibly powerful, would have been very, very useful if it would have got, traction in the marketplace. But when you sit down and talk to people about ontologies, if you're in a room with 20 people and you say ontology, how many people do you really think understand what you're talking about?
Most people fall asleep.
Right. Most of us don't really have a deep understanding of ontologies. True. So as we go on, I think people like Christopher are the ones that are going to be driving this motion forward, because you can hear in his comments that he's passionate about data modeling and data architecture. And I think that's where the people in the chat are saying, you know, we need more focus on that. We don't have much focus on that. And usually, you know, back when Bill and I were doing it, you know, we were rolling chicken bones and burning sage, and hopefully we got you know, the data model right. But it really should be more of a science at this point, and it's not.
And you use the word holistic there. And is that our problem? We've always been focused on the next bit of tech or the next new fad, and therefore that holistic, because I've never seen a real holistic approach throughout an organization in terms of the data modeling.
To my comments earlier, you know, I've not seen an enterprise data, and please, you know, comment if you have. I haven't seen an enterprise data modeling effort be successful. If you take an organization like Procter & Gamble or Coke or CSL Behring or any other multinational organization, and you tell me that you're going to take on an enterprise modeling exercise across all domains, all business units, all functions, I give you 18 months and you'll be fired.
That's about right.
So,
and nothing will get done.
Nothing will get done. Nothing will get done.
Yeah. So we'll be back at square one, right? Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
So this idea of bringing together, you know, as John talked about, knowledge graph, semantics, ontology, conformed dimensions, is really kind of the heart of creating what I like to call a contextual knowledge center. That is where you've got the understanding of how data plays together, and if we can steal a page out of the great B2C companies like the Googles and the Netflix and the Spotifys, if we can determine user intent and we have this contextual knowledge center, now we have the basis not only to automate, but ability to optimize their experience, help them find the right data, the right features to apply to the problem, and even build an autonomous environment that's continuously learning and adapting. So this idea of bringing these things together, what I call this contextual knowledge center, that has the ability with observability sort of built into it, that can really figure out what people are doing. Now it feels more like a Google search than it does like, you know, a federated query where I'm trying to figure out where I drag this and drag that.
What's that?
There's a company down the road from
so
where I live.
Bruno's shaking his head. Let's bring Bruno in. Come on. I think you were shaking your head violently there, Bruno. So I think contextual knowledge center is great. A great word, but practical stuff, Bruno, on this.
I was looking for the opportunity actually because I noticed someone made a comment about why people are moving data. It's about performance, not about context. And I was looking for a way to, you know, politely disagree. And I think Bill gave me that opportunity here. I think the secret sauce of being able to actually create data and insight that is actionable and useful to people is context. You know, that is the ultimate secret sauce. And context comes from multiple dimensions, of course, is everybody wants to feel that they are unique, and we all are unique, right? The secret behind why Google.com is so used and so useful to people is because it brings the complexity of the internet and the sophistication of the internet and personalizes at scale an experience that is highly relevant to whoever is using it at that moment in time. And so I think the reason for why the data mesh and the idea of context is important and resonating with CIOs and chief data officers is because that's their world today. Their world is a highly complex mess that is the result of maybe 30 years of legacy software, new software you need to bring in, new practices you need to bring in, yet they have the requirement of acting faster on that data, and they need to provide this information in a simple, actionable, highly personalized way. And so for that, you need to develop context. Where does context come from? We found 5 dimensions. I call them the 5 S's. One is speed. You have the ability to deliver data at the speed that's required. So by the time it gets to the person, they actually can make a difference with that data. 2 is scale. You have the ability, the left to right view of the data, to be able to see complete context around this information. Maybe you can teach something to the person that that is using and looking at the information. The most powerful thing we've seen is when I tell you something about yourself that you don't know. That's the nirvana, right? And that's the power of context. 3 is security. Am I giving you information that actually I manage securely and you don't feel you're being exposed.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last two S's is around simplicity. We talked a lot about that. And then finally, I call it the smarts, right? The way you get from complexity to simplicity is have superior intelligence. You don't want to expose the complexity to the end user, but you don't want to lose it either. You want to be able to use sophistication to provide simplicity. So this context notion, I think, is extremely powerful. And I think that's why mesh is important, because who's got the context? The domain. It's unrealistic, I think, like John was saying, to take on a centralized team and say they're going to know everything about everybody's business.
No, they won't be.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what Kat might have said around the hub and spoke. While you might set it up as an operating model which is centric to begin with, because maturity of organization and how we are absolutely able to scale, but not yet because we're too immature. But then going down into the confines of the spoke at a later time when we've got standards, governance, and so on. So it does come to a point where, look, you know, the data mesh, as it sits in the domain, as it gets closer to the business outcome, that value we need to deliver. There are some, maybe it's just kind of questions that I've got and others, but how do you effectively manage data governance through this structure? You know, and what are the challenges that we're going to see from that? Because as we know, data governance has to be this sort of centric model, but then we're now, you know, separating that into these domains, and then, you know, a bit of data in this mesh might be, I need that data, and then I need something from this mesh, and do I know if it's well governed or not? And to go back to your 5 S's, you know, security, and can I scale? You know, so how are we gonna? What are the challenges that you see? Or maybe it's a non-argument in terms of data governance. But, you know, how do we cater for that across the data mesh? Chris. Sorry, I'll go to Chris quickly.
Go ahead,
He put his hand up.
Yeah, I guess the way that we've seen our customers do it is to include governance, you know, catalogs, lineage, and security as part of the mesh.
Mm-hmm.
And they're iteratable deliverables, just like changes in schema or changes in the data model or the data visualization that are part of the mesh. And so I think one of the big things is you want to avoid, one of the reasons we're talking about data mesh, just like we're talking about other things that we've inherited from software, like observability, data ops, agility, is that these things that have been created by teams who are dealing with complexity have to play. And so governance is not a one-off activity. It's got to be embedded into what you do.
It's
just like security,
iteration, yeah.
Right. And just take a simple case. You put a new column in a database. Well, that should be governed and have security on it, right? People got to know what it is. And if it's a part of the data mesh, it should be available to others to use with the appropriate security and design. And so I think one of the challenges is it's not about app level versus hub level. It's not about data governance. It's that these things all have to be done together. And that's what makes it hard in an iterative way.
So it sits in that portfolio of things that you need to do within that domain that really...
That's my experience.
Yeah.
I mean...
Okay, Bruno, I'm going to bring you in because I know we haven't got much of your time. So, you know, let's hear your response to that, because it is interesting for a lot of people out there, this governance aspect.
It's a great topic. And I think Chris will be happy to hear that. Every customer I talk to tells me there are two things that they don't do as step one, they should always do, is data ops and data governance. What we run into is situations, people get really excited about a concept like data mesh or data fabric. So they run to go do it and they come back and they realize, oh crap, what about governance and ops? And now they've built something that's unmanageable.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, here's a graphic, hopefully it can help. I don't know if you see it. There you go. Here.
Data.
You see this dot here? Actually, there's basically, here's the idea. There's a white page with a black dot at the top. The black dot at the top is the data your company has. The rest is the data you can be using. So when I was talking about data sharing, you know, every organization is going to need to augment their data with data that's not inside their own walls that they're going to need to maybe want to monetize and so forth. So you need to think about governance as step one, and you need to think about intelligent governance as step one. What I mean by that is governance got to go where the data is and bring it back to you so you can act on it. And so it's an important way to think about re-architecting how you think about it, where in the old world, well, we bring all the data into one place, we govern here, and then we just dispatch it to people. That's over. The data is distributed. So you need intelligent data governance solution or approach that allows you to go and understand that data where it's at. And huge challenge for CDOs, I think.
I hear that. But does this go back to then, John and Bill, what you were talking about earlier in terms of the use case approach? So if you're going through it from a use case approach, you're centering on something that, you know, is an outcome, and then you're looking at it as a portfolio. So it's, you know, you're looking at it through a lens of governance, through data ops, through the mesh, through product generation, and so on. Is that what you were talking about in terms of the use case side of it? And therefore, that's how you could look at a data mesh as well.
Bill?
Yeah, exactly. Samir.
Okay.
I think, I mean, the reason why that I'm sure John the same way, we like the use case approach, is that one of the hardest things that companies have is trying to figure out how valuable their data is, right? You can't determine the value of one's data in isolation of the business. So with a use case approach, most use cases have attributable financial or value associated with it. And that can link the data I need to solve that use case and the analytics. I can now start attributing value to those assets, which really and the result is, as you start doing that at scale across a large number of use cases, having in place this data mesh, this shared environment where you can share data without having to move it. You can move the analytics to the data instead of moving the data to the analytics, is that you're going to find out that organizations are wasting a lot of their money trying to, tag and support and enrich data sets that have little value. That there's probably, I don't have the exact research on this, but I would guess that 10% of the company's data represents 90% of the value generated. Well, let's focus our investments on those 10% of the data, accuracy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and also the generality too, like, having a well-defined data interface with schemas that are documented and governed and that are shareable and composable is really good. But that takes time and effort, right? And how do you know which 10% it is unless you've iterated through it? And the same thing at the app level or the governance level. There's ways to do things crappy at any level and ways to do things well and generalizable and reusable. And so I think the question of investment is really hard for people to know prima facie, and you got to iterate your way through it. And I think I've just come to learn that I just don't know shit. And like, I have to get in front of a customer to know.
Oh my goodness. If you don't know shit, where does that leave the rest of us?
We know less shit. That's what it means.
So listen, Dan has been quite, sorry, John, go ahead.
We know smaller piles of shit.
Yes. And you know those ones here. I probably know those ones, way lower. But
I mean, we all think we do, but we really don't. And it's being humble, because like, man, the whole world of a business is so complicated, you can't know. And the kind of questions they after, whether it's marketing or, it's so hard to know. And it's like, you just can't. And like, maybe you've got an idea, but like, it's so much, you get in front of your customer, get it 70% right and learn and iterate. You're going to find that you've saved the organization so much work, because it's a random walk to get the value. And like, I think we just have to realize that.
Bruno, I know you haven't got much time left with us, but final thoughts from you. And let me just paraphrase a few things. Dan has been very furious on his keyboard. He's this final point I think is interesting. Data governance is only possible at scale in a data-centric model. If you focus on it within a data mesh, which tends to be focused purely on the analytical plane, you don't actually have governance. Governance needs to govern data regardless if used in an operational or analytical context. So it's a lot to take in. So, the data mesh isn't the right place, but what are your final thoughts on that from a data governance lens?
Yeah, so, well, thank you for giving me the final thoughts before I got to jump off. And it's been great to be with you guys. And then we should grab coffee or at least virtually.
Absolutely.
Because he seems to be really passionate about a lot of those things. I think what I'm pointing to is a few things. One, I think data mesh as a concept is an important one to think about as an organizational footprint. Don't be fooled into 2022 by vendors that are going to tell you, here is my data mesh product that you buy and all your problems will go away. We know that this is not possible, right? So I think read the paper on data mesh and think about it as how you organize your team. I mean, 9 out of the 10 questions I get from the chief data officers I work with are rarely about technology. It's about how do I structure myself to take advantage of the data that I have. Second is, I would say, on data diversity and distribution, realize that this idea of centralizing data, and I think both John and Bill talked about that here, is not going to work for you. You know, as you live in a world that's highly distributed across multiple clouds, across multiple prems, and you got to embrace that, because it's not going to go away. In fact, it's going to increase, and it creates an opportunity for you to share data and collaborate with the rest of the community, because your data is valuable, not just internally, but externally. And you have data that's valuable to you that's not in your own walls. And then finally, when I think about, you know, that we didn't talk much about data fabric, we talked about difference between data fabric and data mesh. I would say that data mesh is a construct, organizational, and data fabric is actually feels more like a technology that enables the mesh. But I would say, don't get caught on the semantics. Just go back to what we talked about earlier. What are the use cases that you're trying to enable? And just call it whatever you want. You know, in the end, what my discovery has been, you know, in this career in tech is, we had this early on in the days of dashboards and scorecards. Oh my gosh, it's a cockpit, it's a dashboard, it's a scorecard. It doesn't matter. It is what the customer wants it to be. And what is it that it's enabling? If they call it foo, awesome. But let's not spend hours trying to distribute, you know, to debate the semantics. It just doesn't help, I think.
Yeah.
And so that's where I would end it on.
But they gotta call it data foo, not foo. It's gotta have data in front of it.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Bruno. I you know, brilliant to have you on, and we'll catch you later for that virtual coffee for sure. Thank you so much.
If I don't talk
Thanks,
to you.
Bruno.
Happy holidays, Bruno. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays. Bye.
Thanks. So one of the things that Bruno mentioned again, you know, and all of those dimensions that he talked about in terms of data diversity, sharing, collaboration, comes back to the culture. So there is a question that we had, and I'm trying to find it. Oh my goodness, I've lost it.
We have a lot of comments.
Oh, here we go. What would be some features of an organization's structure and culture that would be the best suited to adopting a data mesh? Now, the other component to that is we talked about data fabric, but we haven't really talked about the distinction between the two, as Bruno was tailing off. So maybe we start with that, and then we look at what are the features of an organization structure and culture that would best support that. So the differences between a data mesh and a data fabric, what are your thoughts on that? Anybody?
I don't have.
I guess I can go. So we did a webinar on data fabric, and when I first heard it, I thought, oh my God, a whole bunch of another vendor BS. It's out there. So I talked to the Gartner analysts and talked to the Forrester analysts, and actually they're very up on it because they've gotten a lot of inquiries on it, which is it's very popular, like in the top 10, the articles and so to me, I think the data fabric is the tool substrate at which you implement your system. And so you could do that in a data mesh way, or you could do it in a big bang waterfall way, but it's the tool substrate. And it's sort of what they've done is said, they've taken the whole chain of, they've added, 10 years ago, it was sort of ELT and governance and databases. And now they've added in data virtualization and streaming and call that a fabric in my mind. And so to me, it feels like it's the set of tools we use to accomplish our data goals.
Okay.
And so that's what I think is, at least in talking with Gartner and Forrester, my understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then from a mesh perspective, let's look at some of the features, I think, of an organization's structure and culture that would best suit to adopting that. What do you think that we need to have in place in order to best adopt the data mesh and then embed it and weave it into the culture?
Well, I think the idea of a product as opposed to a project is important, and that comes from sort of software engineering. There's books about project to product, right? In that you have a project is something that you've done and you walk away from, and a product is something that you live and mature and keeps around. Mm-hmm. And so to me, I think the number one is that you have a team of people who are aligned to sort of raise the child of the product over time. Right?
And hence the mesh talks about a data product owner. Or
data
a product
owner, right?
Yeah.
And then the team, and they get to know the data, they get to know the customers and their needs, and they can work through that faster because of that sort of shared collective knowledge of what the customer wants and what they need. And again, it's very similar to software engineering teams, right? Instead of having a whole bunch of back engineers and front engineers, and they can have, you know, good interfaces, make good neighbors. But if you can align them to a specific set of use cases with a customer, they can actually get more done. And I think that's the, you know, there's a bunch of books on the software side of project to product, but I look at it that way. And so it is an organizational construct of how your team is organized to actually accomplish the goals. And so whether they do it in a data fabric or they, you know, do it using 10-year-old, you know, they do it in a 10-year-old data warehouse, it's still, you know, it's still that same sort of idea.
Okay, so even thinking about it from a data warehouse perspective, but being product centric, as you say, is the right way to do it in terms of delivering value out to the organization. So
yeah, and customer centric. Like your
yes,
goal in your life is to make your end business customer successful, right? And if you're not, then you're not successful, right? And then not sort of I'm done and they can figure it out from here. And so I think that is that's a challenge in a lot of organizations because customers don't know what they want often, and you've got to help work through that.
Okay, good. Any thoughts from Bill and John on that?
You know, I think the way Christopher laid it out is as good as I've heard it. You know, the data fabric and the data mesh are they're marketing terms at this point. Therefore, they have many different definitions. So, you know, looking at the fabric as the underlying technology enablement and the mesh as the conceptual layer on top of it works as well as anything I've heard defined. So that seems to work for me. That's why I didn't jump into it, because I'm like, all right, these are marketing terms that in my opinion are, you know, have lots of different definitions, and each vendor will have a nuance and a differentiation. And Forrester, as Christopher mentioned, Forrester and Gartner and IDC will all define them in certain tones and tenors as well too. Okay,
so let me ask you a question then on the data mesh and that conceptual layer. How do you organize the teams around that? Because what's interesting for me, we've talked about the fabric, we've talked about how to scale, you know, the speed and how to not move data, but within those, and we've talked about hub and spoke as well, but within those sort of data mesh conceptual layers, how are we organizing teams that are data centric, and then how are we organizing teams that are business customer outcome centric?
Well, I think part of the reason why you want to go, Bill?
No, go ahead, John. I'll follow you.
Okay. I think part of the reason why you see Dan and Alan and everybody jumping into the chat with such great commentary is that they're invested into, you know, if you're going to do this, you are going to need governance. You are going to need it across the operational data sources. You're going to need it across the analytical and the reporting. You're going to have a data catalog so people can understand it. I mean, generally, I've been running teams that are very tightly focused and understand the data, like Christopher said, at a very deep level. But if you're going to open this up across the organization, and you're going to have IT professionals and business professionals and operations and consulting and all these different people coming into the mesh, dipping into different data sources, you need all these foundational concepts that has been talked about in the chat. So I'm not too worried about how you organize teams to do this. I think the real challenge that we're faced with right now is trying to define how the infrastructure is going to deliver to these teams so they can actually use the data in a productive way that Christopher's been talking about. So team organization, you can organize them almost any way you want. I think the challenge for us right now is...
I think, John, you know, to your point, and I guess it comes back to the maturity angle and whether the organization is ready to take on board the changes that need to be made for that to become more product and customer centric. And many organizations aren't there. They're just not there. So even if you're not going to go with a big bang approach to implementing a data mesh or a data fabric, what would be some of those practical steps? And I think that's where I'm coming from. Lots of people want to understand, how do we actually practically do this thing? You know, while we talk about it conceptually. So where would we sort of say, you know, if we take one domain, how do we organize around that? And then how do we scale? These are the kinds of things that people I think are struggling with. You know, the foundations I get, absolutely. I think
you can start almost, and Bill, jump in anytime you want. You know, we can start anywhere. You know, if you're having problems in pricing, all right, we'll start in price. if your supply chain is the issue, all right, we'll start there. Or you can start in marketing or sales or any of these areas. Generally the way I've done it in my career is we don't really have to search for a starting point. You find the executives that's yelling the loudest, and that's where you go. Everybody has problems. Every business has issues. It's not like you got to create them. You just got to find the one that's salient for the moment, has the funding, has the interest, has the engagement. That's the way I've done it over and over and over again. Bill and Christopher, I'll yield the floor.
Well, I guess I can give you my experience.
Yeah.
In that, it's sort of small empowered teams where there's sort of, like, here's an example. There's sort of 2 data engineers who are building schemas, building the governance and automation and the testing and deployment, right? So you get a good schema layer that is generalizable, well documented, and handles and then you have what we call a data ops engineer that focuses on automation and testing and deployment. And then there's another group that actually focuses on the sort of app layer, right? The visualizations or the models. And then there's I think honestly that the data team wants to make the analyst team layer, the app layer, successful. And the app layer is really the one who focuses on the business.
On the
right?
business.
And sometimes there's a proxy of a data product owner, sometimes there's not. Sometimes the analyst acts like that. But I think if you think just like 5 or 6 people who are really empowered, you can actually get amazing stuff done. Like we have, I've seen small teams do that. Those teams of 5 or 6 do what teams of 50 could do because they've worked in short cycles. The cycles have determined the value, and they're satisfying the business customer with increments, and they're learning all along the way. Like what Bill says, we don't know what value is. So if you can start finding value quickly and get that feedback, then those small teams actually do it, but do it in a way where you have good defined interfaces, where you have governed, where it's automated, and you're not ending up sort of building this big morass that you're afraid to touch.
Yeah.
Right. You want to have a system that's highly automated and highly changeable in a way that you can make sure when you make a change, if you know something's going to break or not. And when people give you bad data, you're not embarrassed by it. You found it before they see it.
I'll bring Bill in because I think, Bill, you wanted to.
Yeah, I'm going to back to riff on a point that Christopher had made regarding the project
versus product. Yes.
Mindset. I think there's where I have seen success in. So there's a mental mindset change for people who a lot of data science projects are projects, and they end up leading to what I call orphaned analytics, analytics built for one-off use cases that really don't get engineered or managed, and they drift over time and eventually become a liability. And this idea of creating a product mindset is really critical. And I've seen the hub and spoke environment, sort of the hub and spoke, sort of the synergy there, where you have the spoke organizations working in the business units, trying to apply data science to drive use cases that have attributable value, and pushing back to the hub sort of their projects, and that with the hub have responsibility to turn it into product,
and then pushing it out again.
Then pushing it back out. So you create like a single anomaly detection module. You create a single propensity to buy model. You create a single customer predicted lifetime value model. And it's used by all these different business units across all these use cases. And of course, the more it's used, the more it learns, the better it gets. So I do think one of the key points Christopher made is the fact that organizations tend to think of data science as a project, as one-off. And when you change it to a product mindset, it takes more time to build these things initially, but the reuse factor, and I've got a whole economic theorem I talk about how
let's not go into it now.
The marginal propensity to reuse is quite a compelling theory.
Exactly.
You're right.
How does it earn the right to be reusable? Right. What's good to be reused and generalized? Right. Because that's a lot of work. And I actually think the hub and spoke model is perfect for that, because the spokes can tell you if it's valuable, and then it can be generalized either in the spoke or in the hub to make cost efficient, reusable, componentized. And I think that's actually a really interesting discussion, and helps breaks the Hatfields and McCoys of what I see in the hub and the spoke, because if you're working in a hub, your customers are in the spoke, but they're creating value, and maybe that value should be expressed as an attribute of a dimension that everyone sees, or a reusable propensity model.
Yeah.
So one way to address the I love the Hatfield and McCoy's thing is you have to have a rotation program where
it's a very US concept, guys.
Okay. I'm trying to think of another worldwide. So anyway, but the idea that you have a rotation model where people who are out in the spoke, maybe when they build something for a project,
and they come back into the hub.
They carry it to the hub and productize it, and you create this sort of
and that's how you cross-pollinate. So I think I agree with you on that point. There's just Alan's just brought up, because I need to do another book giveaway in a second.
Okay.
But Alan's just brought up a point not yet discussed. If companies adopt data centricity using and I'm afraid I don't know the W3C RDF standards, then traditional application vendors lose all their power as switching costs decrease dramatically. So I'm not too sure what those standards are, but I don't know all of the standards. Can anyone speak to that or no? Okay.
No, sorry, I beyond my pay grade or my smarts level way above me.
Well, I guess I think it's W3C is the web consortium, right? And RDF is a standard that you can use to create ontologies in, right? And I think there is a belief that if you get a good enough ontology, the ontology then can like compile into all the value. And I don't know, I'm not a believer in that, honestly, because I think I've seen that not work in software, and I've seen that, I think ontologies are useful from a data governance standpoint and useful for human communication. But in terms of, I'm a believer that code really matters, and the complexity in code is hard to encapsulate. And I saw it when I've spent 15 years in software, and there's a whole 1990, there was a whole let's build objects, and then the objects will compile into the software automatically. And I never saw that work, and I don't see that work in data. And RDF is a way to express ontologies, and I think that's what he means. Maybe not.
Well, hopefully we'll get a little bit of feedback on the chat. So I'm going to do a book giveaway. Fingers at the ready. This is Python GUI programming with Tkinter. Hopefully I'm saying that right, by Alan D. Moore. So the question is, why is Tkinter widely used to build GUIs in Python? Answers in the chat. Hopefully everybody's heard of Tkinter, because I ain't.
I've never heard of it.
I don't think Arthur's just said a very good question. Damn, I'll have to speak to those people at Pact and tell them to send in some. Okay, here's maybe an easier question.
Yeah, come on.
Machine learning for time series with Python by Ben Alfarth. Okay, what has emerged as a powerful tool to understand hidden complexities in time series data sets?
Is it Bill Schmarzo?
No. Blimey, this is another difficult one, right? Machine learning for time series with Python by Ben Alpha. It's well done, Bill. Cat has got it. So the hint was in the title. Right, so Bill and Cat get it.
All right.
Okay, and maybe before we get into the final,
before we get to the final Jeopardy.
Yes, I don't. Okay, I've got the answer. There it is. So, Learn Python Programming by Fabrizio Romano and Heinrich Kruger. Why? The question is why Python is one of the most popular programming languages. There we go. Why is Python one of the most popular programming languages? I'm sure we all know that out there. I've got the answer. I could put, yeah, go on, Chris.
Oh, because it's really good for building software, and it's got a whole bunch of useful libraries to analyze data and do ML. So it's got two communities who are using it quite extensively. Well, Chris, you get that, but Bill, I'm not giving it to you, and I think we're going to give it to Vito. Because it's simple, it's extremely flexible, and a powerful programming language. So yes, I'm going to give it to Vito and to Chris. Perfect. So now I'm going to get back to where we were, and I'm going to.
We want to go back there. It was scary. It was scary back there.
So well done to all those people. I'm afraid we couldn't crack the answer to one of those books. So I have an actually interesting question for you, direct, Chris, which has come from Tom Lissman. Can you give a real life example where data ops really made a significant impact on the way analytics was done?
How many do you want?
Well, roll the dice and just pick one.
I guess, let's talk about a term that's grown to be distorted, right? And so as a vendor, I'm part of the distortion field around a term. But my definition of data ops is the set of practices and cultural norms that allow people to iterate on their analytic work quickly and do that with high quality and low errors and handle some of the collaboration problems. And the examples I've seen are I guess some of the examples I've talked about where small teams have huge productivity increases, and their productivity becomes from their spending more time doing work that is valuable to their customers because they're delivering in short cycle times, they're not in as many meetings, and they still end up with well-governed, high quality, low error rate, highly useful systems. And so I guess we see sort of 10x productivity in people because they're and teams being much more successful. And I guess I've seen it across several industries now. In terms of working in this agile and iterative way. And I think a lot of people who've been in the industry for a while push back on it because we've all been screwed, honestly, by customers yelling at us because we're too slow, data providers giving us crappy data, having to work late nights, and our life sucks, honestly. And we just did the survey of data engineers with a data governance company. I think we did this decent sized survey. We have like 500 people who responded. And 78% of them wanted to have a therapist because their job was so stressful. And
what?
I actually
oh my goodness,
that's true from my experience as when I've been a data engineer and led data engineering teams. It's hard because you're caught between the rock of hard place. Your customers want perfect data and they want it delivered fast. And when they want follow-up questions, they want that, they think you're Amazon. They're going to ask you 10 follow-up questions and you got to get them overnight to them. And then if you find one that's really valuable, they want to ship it out to 1,000 people. And then the people who are giving your data don't care that you exist and they're going to drop columns and break you on them. And so how do you live in that world? And I had the experience of living in that, running teams and living in that world for years. And it sucked, honestly. And I think we have to realize that is our world and build systems to handle that instead of suffering to handle that. And so I see data ops as a way to the cure of team suffering, because that world of crappy data, demanding customers, and ever-present technical change is there. And so to me, I'm obviously a big believer in it. I've written 2 books and started a company on it, but I've seen it work in. I'm an older guy. I started my career in actually manufacturing industries in Wisconsin, working in factories. I've seen it in software, this idea of focusing on the system and not just the deliverable. So I'm a big believer in it, and I've seen it work.
Did anybody want to come in on that? Bill or John, you want to?
That was great. That was great.
That was awesome. So I know we've talked about ideal team structure, but there is a lot, and you've just mentioned, Chris, it's a good segue for the data engineering part of this and that team. People are asking, data engineering, is it part of the analytics team or is it a separate team?
Yeah, there's so many structures to teams out there, man. Like take the roles and a dice and like you've got examples of it. Is it centralized? Is it hub and spoke? Is it there's like a mesh of teams out there, and like, is it data engineers, analytic engineers? Are they aligned to business? Are they in IT? It's like, yes. So I've seen it all.
Again, it's about what fits for your organization, and then learning and iterating on that and seeing what fits the best way to deliver that value. So go on, Bill.
Yeah, the one thing go ahead, John.
Sorry, John.
It depends on everything that Chris said is absolutely true. And it depends on the point in time, to your maturity point, Samir. Depends on where you are. I've written in building analytics teams that, you're going to have an artisanal team, you can have a factory team, you can have a hybrid team. It all depends on where you are in your maturity journey. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, so the one thing I would just, however you structure it, the one thing that I found that works really well is basically trying to embrace the concept of organizational improvisation. That is that you can move people around between projects based on skill sets and demands while still maintaining operational integrity. And my example is you watch how a good soccer team plays, right? And they flow and they accomplish great things, and you can pull somebody out, put somebody else new in, and the team doesn't fall apart, right? You have that ability to improvise and bring the right people in, which, by the way, argues for an organizational structure not built on boxes, but built on swirls, right? That you don't have organizational structures that says, "Oh, you're a data engineer and you're a data scientist," because those roles they overlap. So you need to basically, depending on the need, you move the right people in and around to solve.
Because good people want to learn and they want to do different things, and they don't want to get stuck. Like one of the biggest things that I hate is you do good work and then you're stuck running it for years. And like, it's your hairball. You built the hairball and it's your hairball. And now the worst part is like, I used to do that with my teams, have them build hairballs, be hairballs and heroes till they quit and find a new job. And then like, I'm stuck. And like, I hate that, right? So like, part of if you really want good rotation, because you've got good people who want to learn, you've got to say, they can't like build these high complexity systems that only they can run. They've got to they've got to be able to hand that off to other people.
And Chris, that gets back to your point about they got to build products, right? They got to build things that are, they're sustainable, version control, all that kind of stuff. That's, upgradable, all that kind of stuff. Exactly.
Yeah. And like, and the other part too, of like people moving around is you've got to get new people in. So, I'm very proud of my son. He's 22. He joined Amazon as a software engineer. And you know what he did his first week? He fixed a bug and deployed it to production. And, I know my son, I'm proud of him, but like, I wouldn't trust him to fix a bug. Like I saw him when he was a teenager, right? I saw his room when he was a kid. And so like, I wouldn't, but like, why did they do that? And
hopefully no one from Amazon is listening to this.
Yeah.
Hopefully your son's not listening to it.
I'm sure he's not listening. And so, because he could fix a bug and there was a whole system around them that had tests and automation, and he could fix a little piece and he would tell if he broke everything else around him. And that's sort of like, good software teams try to make that happen. They try to say 22-year-olds can fix a minor bug, get it into production quickly. And how many data teams do that? Can you do anything and get it into production that week? It's like it's like a craft system. You've got to go to the guild and then like you get to the top and then you finally can do something. And then all the people who are at the top who know the system, they get bored and then they quit. And so like, I don't know, I worry that I just had too much experience of like really good people getting bored and quitting and moving around. I love the swirl concept because that really keeps people engaged.
And I do too, but here's the conundrum. So I was just before I came on this call and joined everybody today. I was speaking to a CIO, and as soon as we were starting to talk about use cases and pretty much working within that similar language, but not in the swirl mentality, Bill, but very similar. These dynamic iterative teams that could help to build and develop stuff and push them out quick and value. This is too much for us. We can't do this. He was not expecting that level of thinking behind what they need to move their organization. And I think a lot of people are sitting in the same bucket. They don't know how to start and where to start. And they think that they need to, we talk about the fundamentals and the building blocks. They think they need to spend 2 years to get data governance in place and implement that whole building block and get a properly governed database and, getting teams in place who are data literacy. Let's do 2 years of data literacy and blah, blah, blah. A lot of that stuff is BS, in my opinion. But what we're not doing is we're not having these levels of stepping stones, which, we go from a small use case and step up with the integrated, view of the governance, the infrastructure and architecture and so on. And this is where I think it's still confusing for a lot of people, CIOs especially and CDOs, because they're working within monoliths. They're working in organizations that can't move as quick. So how, there are bigger challenges, I think, when it comes to the mindset shifts.
Well, it's
Sorry,
also
Bill.
like data science is almost more of an apprenticeship than it is a profession. That's probably the wrong term. But
Well, I don't
mean,
even see it as data science as I see that whole ecosystem as an internship in almost in that way. You know, I think you have to look at it from a, you know, Chris talked about, you know, the analysts will then move and push those products out quickly, and then, you know, be able to build something new and reusability and so on. Organizations aren't staffed that way. They're not even thinking about that.
they're not staffed that way. It's the fact is they're not structured that way.
Correct. Sorry, it's not structured that way. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think there's got to be organizational mindset shift and cultural change in order for that to occur. And like Kat says, if you need 2 years to get data governance in place, you're living in 2010, probably living in 2002, you know.
Well, I mean, that sort of happened in the IT world and the software development world. You go back 15 years ago, right? And the idea of continuously deploying and fast iterations, it was like insane to people. They're like, how do I do this? How do I structure my software team?
Yeah.
And, you know, companies have gone on this multi-year DevOps journey to make that happen, right? And agility. And of course, some failed and some succeeded, right? As any organizations do. And, you know, some of the things that, you know, we look for are companies who've succeeded with that and are trying to try that with their data teams, right? And try to make that happen. And the reality is it's not, it's a journey just like that. And it's changing, you know, and if you want to go from, you know, if you want to change how cars are manufactured and be more like Toyota, it took American manufacturers years to learn how that. And the same thing with software. And I think we just have to push ourselves on the journey and not look for quick wins, but get on it. And I think there's a lot of resources out there for people to use to help them on that journey.
Okay, well, guys, final thoughts from John and Bill. Chris, we'll come back to you, but I think you've, you know, wrapped up very eloquently, and I think it's been a brilliant conversation. We've just had Tim Smith say this is one of the best webinars and discussions I've attended. Thank you. So, John and Bill, final thoughts.
Great year. Really have enjoyed the AMA series. I'm glad that we kicked it off and that have had some really wonderful, wide-ranging discussions over the sessions.
Yep.
Christopher, thanks for being part of it. Bruno, wherever you are, thanks for that. Look forward to many more in the new year.
Yeah, I'll agree. Happy holidays, and here's to a great, wonderful next year.
Thank you so much, everybody. And I think the final word from me is it's kind of come in. You know, there's a couple of things that Bruno said. It's not a tech construct, it's an organizational construct. And that really is the way that we've got to speak, the narrative that we've got to talk to people about, especially CDOs and CIOs, because I don't think they're still hell bent on this whole technology bent. So thank you. Alberto says best AMA of the year. Look, we're getting a thumbs up. Thanks for thought-provoking talk. Bye, everybody. Wonderful to have you engage. Thank you, John, Chris, Bill, and Bruno, who's not here, but you've been fantastic. I must agree, this has been one of the best AMAs ever. It's been awesome. So thank you all, and thank you for your questions. Well done to all the winners. We'll see you in 2022. Happy holidays, happy Christmas, happy Kwanzaa, whatever it is, enjoy yourself, right?
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.